Talking Industry, topical debate from the worlds of automation, manufacturing and engineering. Brought to you by DFA Manufacturing Media.
I'll introduce our panellists in reverse order so that the first panellist can go straight into his section. Each of the speakers will have about 5 minutes on a subtopic within the overall additive manufacturing spectrum. And we're going to try to cover where additive manufacturing has come from, where it's going. I think it was called rapid prototyping when I first came across it, and then 3D printing, and now it's called additive manufacturing. So there's a clue there. But we're also going to talk about some of the pitfalls and some of the disadvantages of the system, of the technology, where it works, where it won't work, and so on. And I will interject throughout with questions, and we'd love you to do the same. So our three panellists are Simon Jones, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Domin Fluid Power. Then we have Dr. Alberto Baldin, and I actually inadvertently promoted him by calling him Head of Additive Manufacturing Program, but he's corrected it for me, and he's Additive Manufacturing Technical Leader of Europe. So we look forward to the next promotion in due course. His English, I'll embarrass him a bit more. His English is fantastic. I'm married to a half Italian. I only wish my Italian was as good as his English. And finally, and first but not least, because he'll be kicking off first, is Professor Chris Tuck, who's Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Knowledge Exchange at the University of Nottingham. And Chris is going to give us a general overview of the technology going through the present towards the future. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks Andy. It's quite a daunting thing to be able to try and give you an overview of a technology that's been developed over the last 40 years or so. So if you're able, you can cast your mind back to about 1982, 1985. It was a slightly different place. I think the NEC existed then, but that's when the first patents around additive manufacturing were being filed, and the first companies that were developing machines were being filed. And you might know that those were around the stereolithography process, vat polymerization, and that kind of idea. And then moving into the new, developing into laser sintering, binder jetting at MIT, and then the processes that you've seen coming on from Fraunhofer, which has then spawned the metal systems that you can see in most exhibitions today. So a lot of the development of rapid prototyping machines was absolutely because of that. It was about prototyping, about moving product development as fast as possible. And so really a lot of the issues that we would be dealing with now in terms of whether it's research or production are actually stemming from that initial set of patents, because what was considered at the time was you just need a shape. You just need a shape, be able to have a look at it, see whether it works. CAD was very rudimentary. I can have a look at it. I can maybe even put it onto a dummy component or a dummy setup and see whether it fits. I can do all the fit form testing kind of thing that I want to do. So that was why Chuck Hull spawned vat polymerization or stereolithography, and that turned into the 3D Systems Corporation. That's why laser sintering started at DTM in Austin. Those was then bought by 3D Systems. That's why Stratasys started with inkjet printing technologies, why EOS started with laser sintering as well. So that was the root cause of additive manufacturing as it stands today. And actually, it went from rapid prototyping to something called rapid manufacturing in 2000. So the first time that manufacturing was kind of talked about was around the turn of the century. And that was, well, hold on, we've got these fabulous machines that can build components that we actually can't build in other ways if we wanted to. So why are we building standard products? Why are we building things with mold angles, all of that kind of stuff? Why can't we just actually use these machines to build things, and then we don't have the tooling. And often the business case for additive manufacturing is because you don't have the tooling, you either have design freedom or you have some economies that you can realize for low volume and bespoke structures. So that was kind of where rapid manufacturing started in sort of 2000, 2001, probably here in the UK, although there were a lot of discussions going on with colleagues in Belgium and the US at the time. So it was kind of those three countries that were leading that vanguard in rapid manufacturing. And then machines and materials developed and they got more useful. They didn't curl up in your hand. They didn't fall to pieces after a few weeks on the shelf. They didn't start to go yellow under UV light and through the window. And they started to get better, and so that started to become more of a reality. And then in about 2010, you had the 3D printing revolution that you mentioned, Andy. So that was really about home users thinking, actually what I can do is I can build an extrusion machine, I can stick it in my garage, I can build what I like. And that's then spawned another set of hype that kind of carried the wave forward again. And additive manufacturing already existed at that point. Rapid manufacturing was considered a bit wrong because rapid manufacturing, well, the process was never rapid. What's rapid about it? Well, the rapid thing was going from idea to part. That was the rapid part. So the term additive manufacturing was coined, ASTM was set up, and the F42 committee defining all of the 7 different classifications and what we mean by additive manufacturing. So we're starting to standardize a manufacturing industry and a manufacturing technology from about 2008 to 2010. Then the spur of 3D printing, and then you had on top of that, then from extrusion machines, you've seen the Ultimakers, the MakerBots. You can see all the plethora of new, smaller, more affordable machines coming out of it, but then also the metal systems taking off because the metal systems have the great advantage that it's real materials that people understand rather than photopolymers and things like that we've seen in rapid prototyping. So what has driven all of this development is actually becoming more relevant to manufacturing people on the shop floor. So being able to build quickly from concept to end part, being able to check what you've made and what you've designed is fit for purpose, but also then moving on to having some materials that can actually perform in environments, and then moving into really serious production where you've got massive advantage in design, advantages in material properties, and then moving on to what we think at Nottingham is the next stage, which is moving from really clever shapes, really clever designed components to actually designing systems and manufacturing a whole thing in one go on one machine. So this is where we're talking about printing electronics into parts, printing drug delivery into components like tablets, or even cellular structures, so organ printing and things like that. So that kind of brings us up to where we are, I think, today.
That's a brilliant whistle-stop tour of additive manufacturing, and it sounds really exciting where it's going as well. You mentioned quite a few of the pioneering companies. Were the market leaders then the same as the market leaders now? And also, what limitations in terms of process does metal printing involve? I mean, does that rule out some of those processes entirely?
Okay, so the leading companies then, so it would have been people like 3D Systems, Objet and Stratasys that then merged into Stratasys, EOS. You would have had Zcore at that time, who were bought by 3D Systems a few years ago. You had some of the other binder jetting systems, but actually in the main, quite similar. There's been consolidation of some of the smaller players into larger conglomerates, but generally, yes, it's similar names that you hear. Materialise as well, obviously, the Bureau, but also, very importantly, a software provider that people forget. So it's pretty similar to what it was in the early 2000s, I would say. In terms of the metal system, so metals have a really interesting dichotomy. So what we're able to do with metals is build very, very complex shapes with materials that people are used to, stainless steel, Ti-64, aluminiums, tungstens, lots and lots of material capability. The problems are that the material properties aren't the same as what they are in a standard process. And so, because the materials haven't been developed for that process. And so what you end up with is something that looks and feels pretty similar to what you would have from a standard manufacturing process, but is actually very different under the skin. And that's before you start talking about surface roughness and support structures and things like that that need to be removed. And so it does have limitations, but it's one of the it's probably the technology that has brought along more people with it than any of the others, because actually it's a real thing that I understand to a certain extent.
I know that Alberto will talk about standards. I mean, maybe you want to talk now, which is fine.
Is it working?
Mike?
Hello?
Try again. Yeah, sounds like it.
Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So, welcome and nice to meet everybody. Is it not working? Okay. So, good morning to everybody. I wanted to touch the point, let's say, and to talk about a bit of metal additive, and to introduce the field I'm working on, since I'm working for an STO, so a standardization organization that is dedicating a lot of efforts also on this technology. So one of the benefits, as you were saying, of additive exactly is and metal additive is the possibility to create really complex shapes that are now involved and used for really a broad range of applications, such as medical, motorsport, aerospace, oil and gas. One of the key blockers that we see, at least from a standardization perspective, is the understanding of how the defects of the process-induced defects are affecting the materials, and how to understand how the material and the parts behaves when they are in service, because these technologies they bring quite a peculiar family of defectologies compared to casting and forging, and there is not yet a mature understanding and control of material-induced defects, such as surface roughness, microporosities, and many others. This is something that, for example, there is a lot of effort from different type of organizations to lift up the maturity of the understanding of these products made by metal additive, how they behave in terms of defectology, to assess, for example, the life of components, to calculate the parts for fatigue with so there is also, from university, there is a lot of material development and testing, and so this is, in my opinion, one of the key elements that shall be unlocked for the future, and to make this technology more mature. Yeah, that's
so
one of others that we can discuss.
we will get back to that as well. I mean, materials engineers tend to be quite a conservative bunch.
Yes.
And they like to work to specifications.
Yes.
I mean, and particularly, I think that's true in the metals field, perhaps even more so than the polymers field.
Yeah.
How do you get the standards to keep up with the developments in the materials and the process? And are we going to be able to shorten that time to make that process easier?
So traditionally, standardization processes are quite slow. It's not a fast process. So the technology runs fast, and then the standards try to keep up. So there are some interesting activities. One of one of these is the one that has been put in place by ASTM International, which is the organization I am working for, to generate some task force or group of experts that plan some programs to speed up the standardization of fast technologies. Additive is the first of its kind, but there will be others for, I don't know, big data, artificial intelligence, automation, and other fast-growing technologies.
Yeah, you make a very good point that this isn't limited to additive manufacturing, but all the technologies you see around here are moving so quickly that they're ahead of standardization.
Yes. I also want to bring a bit of, before working for ASTM, I work in some industries, motorsport, and for a service bureau here in the UK. And what I could see in three different companies, they were having three different ways of working, three different internal specifications and process control documents, because there were no standards at the time. There are still gaps, but its own company developed its own way of addressing some technical problems and try to control this technology. Now we are going towards a convergence.
Thank you, Simon. It's time to bring you in, I think, because you're involved with the fluid power industry, which is probably as conservative as any industry, and yet you've told me about some really advanced things happening in this field. So tell us a little bit about your company and what you do, and then how you've managed to overcome that kind of conservative approach in the industry, which we actually heard about yesterday from a separate session from the British Fluid Power Association, and the slow take-up, for example, of smart technologies in that field. How you've managed to beat that and forge ahead in the materials field.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this one working, or should we play?
We're having some microphone fun.
Pass the password microphone. I'll take that one. Okay. Nice COVID-safe microphone exchange. Would be good. Yes, morning. So my name's Simon Jones. I work for a company called Domin Fluid Power. And I think I will tell you a bit about what we do, but I think I'd like to start with the question that was posed today: is what is the future of additive and AM? And for us, I think it is in applications. It's not in bigger machines, faster print times. It's in finding the right application today, investing in that, and all those other things will help it get there. And it feels a little bit like the problem today with the industry is, it's a bit like a bad Western movie. Everyone's in the saloon and pointing guns at each other, and everyone's waiting. Everyone's waiting for standards. Everyone's waiting for new machines, cost down, better power to supply. And no one's actually doing anything. And until we do something, it will always be a prototyping technology, and it'll always be things that the very rich can afford to do, the Formula Ones of the world. So we think that actually there are three key ingredients to getting the right application, and if you get the right application, everything else flows from it. First one is finding something where additive gives you a value, gives a value to someone. It's a differentiator. It's probably not in reality printing that manifold that you've cast for 25 years. There's no value in that, so it's got to do something. The second one is you have to be able to, and picking up on what my colleagues here said, it is a different process, it's a different material, so you have to have a way that you can validate that it functions and that it won't break fundamentally. And if you're relying on things like in-process monitoring, which isn't there yet, it's not going to work. And the third one, I think, is it has to be commercially viable today. So it can't be one where we're waiting for things to come good for it to work. It has to work today. So we're a very fast-growing company. We're manufacturing today servo valves, so hydraulic control valves. We use only additive, as in additive is in every single one of our products. We have a number of other technologies we use as well, but additive is at the heart of everything we do. And we're able to do that because we kind of tick those three boxes. So we use metal laser powder bed fusion. We use it because it gives us a differentiator. It gives us, if we start from scratch, if we said using physics, what is the best geometries, kinematics systems to deliver the function to the customer. There are elements in there that you can only realize if you use additive. So we use additive for those elements, in particular kind of flow galleries and opening of large sections. And we make hundreds a month. We sell hundreds a month. We make them at a really good gross margin. So it's profitable today. We're doing that on pretty old machines, in honesty, so not the most cost-effective machines. We're not monitoring the quality of the powder. We don't have in-process monitoring. But what we do, to pick up on the second point, is every single part that we make, we know that for us, the killer for our parts is fatigue, and in particular, it's pressure fatigue. So we've said, okay, what we will do, our approach to quality is we will put 1 million cycles on every part before it goes out the door, and we'll do that so that we can guarantee infinite life to our customers of that additive part. So we've got thousands of parts now out in the field with customers, and we've had no returns. And we've done all that with a cost of quality of less than 10%. So we haven't invested in monitoring powder oxygen content, for example. We haven't done it by putting things in the machine to look at it, because the cost is too high and we can't see a link between that and a tangible output. I think the third thing we talked about earlier was commercially making it work. So for us, it is only using additive where it gives that value. So actually, we don't market ourselves as an additive company. We don't market our products as an additive product. Interestingly, we sold a product to an American aerospace company who took it all the way through their TRL process. After their TRL 4 review, they phoned us up and said, "Oh, this is great. What's in the product?" And we're like, "Oh, it's an additive core." And they panicked at that point. And they said, if we'd known that, we would have never taken it through this process. It's a different technology. But it had done it. And actually, because they didn't know and because it was on output, they loved it and are going to fly it later this year. So I think for us, very much the focus is find the right place, find the right application. Don't believe the hype and all get swept away with, next year we're going to have a 28 laser machine that will do it all in 2 seconds, because you're going to have to fill that machine to make it worthwhile, and you're not going to do that unless you've got the applications. Right, yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. So very much we think the future is in developing these applications and going with progress now versus perfection tomorrow.
The market sectors, I mean, you mentioned aerospace. Is that exclusively where you're using the technology, or can you bring it down into more, let's say, mundane market sectors?
At the risk of offending people in those sectors and calling it mundane, aerospace for us is a long way away, I think. So we sell mostly into animatronics, robotics, die casting, injection molding, forming, things like that. More and more automotive now as well. And you're right, they are conservative, but it's not conservative around adopting new technology, it's just conservative around change. Yeah. There's been no change in this industry for 50 years, right? So anything new is a disruptor and is different. So we have to work super hard to convince them it's worthwhile making. And for us, that means not marketing ourselves as additive. Additive, we think, will be another reason for them not to do it.
There must be a stage when you've got to assess whether you're going to use a conventional manufacturing process or you're going to go down the additive route. And with having those technologies available to you, how do you make that assessment? I mean, you've said already that some of these parts can't be made by conventional methods, but are there some that can, where you might go either way?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of our products have an additive element, and maybe an element that's cast, an element that's a wound motor. It's a tool, right? So we generally try and start with functionality. What's it got to do? What's it got to last? And then from there we say, okay, what the right process for this therefore is maybe laser powder bed, maybe it's binder jet, maybe it's casting, you know.
And then you design for that process with its own specific characteristics.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have to be jack of all and master of none, ultimately. Yeah. But
so, Alberto, your experiences in
Formula One,
the very high-tech
yes.
Industries of you mentioned medical or aerospace. How do the considerations differ from what Simon has described? So,
well, motorsport was one of the early adopters, but it's quite a unique type of business because the budgets are huge. You don't have to make profit out of the parts that you are producing. So, and then you can risk. The risk involved is complete. There is a driver racing a car, which is okay. There is a person in it, but there is definitely not an airplane flying. So the rigor that you have to apply for manufacturing the part, qualify the parts, is in a completely different range of complexity, and the effort and the investment that you do to test the parts and so on is completely of another level. So there are some critical application also involved that are fatigue stressed components on racing cars, and then they need anyway to be the component they have to be tested at fatigue as well. So medical also is an early adopter, and actually there are some really good business cases of companies that could boost their revenues by introducing additive, a metal additive especially for the manufacturing hip replacements, the acetabular caps, for example, and switching from traditional manufacturing to additive, because they could reduce the amount of steps to manufacture, to produce, for example, the cap and the metal kind of sponge that is needed for the bones to grow in one step, basically. Before it was machining and then plasma spray, and medical here again is application based, but there are really successful business cases, but they are driven by the part functionality, and in medical, from also a quality perspective, there are still some understanding and some gaps, let's say, on the knowledge that we have. For example, how the powders they have to be recycled. How many recycle can you do on your powder on titanium, especially, is really can be problematic. There is every company has its own rules. It's 5 recycles, 10 recycles. This is a huge impact on the business case as well. And understanding how this really difficult and complicated structure they are behaving mechanically. There is still, there are studies. I think probably then Nottingham has experience in that. But there is not a standard or a unique, understanding on that. How they behave, for example, mechanically. That's another area where, for example, also ASTM, ISO, and other SDOs are working on powder recycling, especially for critical application, lattice structure, characterization. These are all topics that are still needing homework to understand.
Thank you. Before I bring Chris in again, which I'm going to, do we have any burning questions about maybe, how you might want to set up with an additive? Does anybody here use additive manufacturing at the moment? I mean, that's a question. Anybody keen on, thinking about it for a particular application? So any questions, just please put your hands up, and we're here to answer those questions. So if you have any questions you want to ask of our panel, then please do. Yes, please.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? No?
Yeah.
Not working?
Now, yes, I think.
Oh, it's fine.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I work in the testing, inspection, certification industry. So my only question would be surrounding like the regulatory bodies and how well do they keep up with this technology? Obviously, Alberto, you work with standards, so...
Yeah, so I had, I think I bring you the experience when I was in the industry. So I work in some facilities when you are in a manufacturing environment, and then I think you can confirm that you need to work according to some you need to have some accreditation, ISO 9001, IS 9100 for aerospace, and so on. So you need to create all the implement a quality management system, and that is not additive optimized, I would say. So you can be compliant, and I saw that in different occasions. You can pass the you get the accreditation. You are compliant to that, but you could do really wrong things from an additive perspective, and you are still compliant. So, for example, these kind of audits, they are not really kind of questioning what are the standards on additive requiring. They, of course, impose and implement what are, for example, aerospace processes, and you do have to be compliant with, but there should be an effort also from the accreditation institutions to review this kind of processes to keep in consideration the peculiarities of additive. So there is a gap there.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions before I resume my seat? Any more comments as well? Yes.
Yeah, so that's from for example, I'm bringing again ASTM. So another effort that not just STM but other STOs are doing is to introduce some specific audits for organizations that are additive manufacturer tailored, not just aerospace or medical, so that they make sure they allow the business to be additive manufacturing, so to reach a level of excellence from an additive manufacturing process. Because as I said, you can be compliant to an aerospace accreditation, but you could do not optimal things in additive for like powder managing, powder handling, powder recycling, and how do you clean the machines, how do you handle the parts, or how do you inspect the parts, and we could list a really long, we could make a really long list of examples. Yeah.
So, Chris, we've heard of a couple of applications now, one in the fluid power industry, others in the more high-tech industries. How should people go about getting into this technology area? Where do they go?
Where do they go? So that's a good question. I mean, the first place people should go is to look at what kind of applications are being used, are being developed with additive manufacturing. As Alberto said, the healthcare industry is one that's got a lot of diverse applications, whether it be hearing aids. In the hearing aids that are manufactured, every one of them is manufactured by an additive process, and there's millions and millions of those per year that are in service and have been for probably the best part of 20 years. And there are lots of applications that people aren't necessarily aware of. So just digging around on the internet, you can find quite a lot of reasonably high volume but very high value applications, and that's the key. If you're interested in high volume but the part isn't high value, forget it. Yes. The way we think about it at the university and in Added Scientific is generally additive manufacturing is good for small and complicated. If it's small and complicated, it generally works out in terms of a business proposition. If it's complicated and really high value, it can be quite big as well, because price comes with size.
That's where things like die casting, injection molding would kind of take over.
Yeah, exactly.
And presumably there's a sort of cut-off that depends on a few other factors as well.
And there's a lot of literature and articles out there on break-even points, on the level at which you need to invest in tooling, for example, for injection molding, and where additive comes in. You might decide, actually, I don't want to put my whole leg in the water. I just want to put a toe in which case bridging components is obviously so before your tooling arrives, you can get things to market faster. So some of the learnings that you would have from the rapid prototyping and rapid manufacturing industry of old still work today, as long as you can qualify your component to be suitable for the end use. And again, there are examples from the 2000s. MG Rover actually used to use additively manufactured components on some of their cars because they couldn't get the tooling in place in time to get their launches out. Those are real applications that maybe some of them are still on the road, probably not, but maybe they are. There's a lot of background articles and literature and people who know what you should do and when the first thing is to make sure that this is a route you want to go down because you can see the value in your component.
Thank you. I mean, I think there is an exhibitor here, Control Techniques, who've we spoke about last year in one of our Talking Industries, and your point about low volume or complexity, I think, is very good because they're using it for the enclosures of a motor drive, but also for the tools and the jigs and fixtures that are used to, and that's where the complexity comes in as well. So, but it's probably one-offs. You know?
Yeah. Complexity comes in kind of two different baskets. One is complexity for performance, so complexity driven for higher performing components, and that might be where you bring in lattice structures. The acetabular cups is a perfect example, and then there's the complexity because of the situation. So if it's a component that interacts with a person, and you've got a completely bespoke geometry, then additive almost always wins. So that's where your hearing aids and the teeth aligner type applications come in. And again, teeth aligners, millions and millions are used to make teeth aligners every year. And actually the teeth aligner, the additive part of the teeth aligner manufacturing process is the mold, not the actual final part.
There used to be, maybe there still are, a lot of bureaus out there who. Is that still the case? And,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, when do you decide to have your own machine in-house, and when do you continue to use a bureau?
Well, there's obviously a cost-benefit analysis that would need to be done, but yeah, there's lots of bureaus around. There's increasingly more capability in the bureau market, either through investment in new machines. There's the company down in Silverstone that's just launched digital manufacturing centre, which again is predicated around metal systems. But 3T had polymer and metal. There's lots of bureaus around the UK who can help you. Yeah, Material Solutions. Yeah, who help with are now owned by Siemens and used to work with Rolls-Royce a lot. The bureaus are a good place to get information on design capability. Why are you designing it like that for our process? Because they know their processes intimately, and also they know how to cost reduce the components that are going on their machines as well. In terms of making the decision, you can make. It depends on your application, as always, but you can make that decision based on the type of product you're after. So you could, again, put your toe in the water with something that's more of a home-based system, like a VAT polymerization, a Formlabs type machine, or an extrusion system, and just actually get knowledge in the company of how they work for your application. And then you can, if need be, you can go into then the bureaus to get that higher performing system. You've got to think your low end machines are anywhere between a few £100 to a few £1,000, between a few £1,000 and then a few £100,000, and maybe closer to the £1 million worth of investment. And then you've got all the ancillaries that come with it, the training that you need to do. So it's a very big leap to having your own machine.
Simon, when you decided to do additive manufacture, how did you go about it? What vision did you have that made you think, well, this is something we should consider?
So in the early days, we worked, much as Chris has said there, we knew that there were things that we wanted to realise geometry-wise, and we had a suspicion that additive was the way to do it, but we didn't want to invest in a machine. We didn't want to have that overhead, because it's not, like I say, just the machine. There's all the health and safety that goes with it, and the post-processing and space. So we worked with a bureau and did that initial engagement, and it's good, and you get some good learning and output from it. You're always limited in terms of what you can control and what you can learn, though, because you're fundamentally giving something to someone else to make, and then you get something back, and it's very much in their interest to give you something that they believe conforms. So the vision kind of changed at that point to saying, well, we're actually getting to the point where we think this could be a proper production technique. We think we've got enough product that's going to sell to fill a machine, and I think capacity on a machine and utilization is a big one. You shouldn't be buying a machine to utilize it 5% of the time. It doesn't make sense. So when we tripped over that kind of 50-60% utilization mark, we said, okay, well, let's invest now. And we were lucky that there was grant funding around to do it, which offsets some of the capital. But going forward, we're happy to hold a bit of a hybrid model on this. We want to maintain in-house capability for that learning, development, growth purpose. But there are bureaus out there in the UK and abroad now that are cost competitive, that can offset the fact that if we were to buy 3 machines and only fill 2 of them, we've got one asset sitting there doing nothing. So for us, any kind of surge or overflow capacity, we've devised a way to kind of to certify supplier parts coming in, and very much for us that's the model. It's whatever is there when we need it.
Right. Okay. Yes, of course.
So another, I'm just want to add a topic here. It's about also going back to the aerospace question of iTech, but it's related to this. Is that if you work for aerospace, for example, you need to have statistics and you need to have a base of data and really high caliber material data set that you need to show. You need to show consistency, robustness, and stability of your processes. And this is probably also a factor that, especially a new player in additive manufacturing, doesn't really. It's difficult to quantify this cost in advance, because generating a material data set for an aerospace application can cost 500,000 to £1 million in additive for metal application. So this is a huge cost. And when you enter the market and you are aiming to supply aerospace application, you might not know the sort of cost that is. So this is, for example, a kind of a cost that you might not know at the beginning, right? If you don't have the expertise, or maybe you don't get some support from some advisory services, and this caused some problem, I think, to the early adopters, that they were driven probably by the dream and by the hype years ago, and they keep on expanding, and but they then maybe faced some costs that they were not known in the early days, I think.
Yes. What you would call the hidden costs, I guess, and yeah, I mean we've kind of encroached now onto some of the limitations, and I'm conscious of time because I know that because we pushed this one back, we got to do a Ryanair changeover between this one and the next one, but also I just want to touch, a little bit on the limitations, but from a positive point of view. We've talked about costs. We've talked about standardization, overlap with alternative, established conventional technologies. I'd like to just talk about, firstly, what are the limitations on materials, and how do you see that being further resolved in the future? And what would be your kind of one wish list for additive manufacturing going forward that would really make a difference?
Do you want to start with that? Okay. So in terms of, I guess the dirty secrets of additive manufacturing, if you want to call it that. So there are a number, and there's a lot of people. And again, 10 years ago, you would have heard lots of people say you can make anything with additive manufacturing, blah 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 blah. Well, it's just not true. Every manufacturing process has design limitations. We just have less in additive manufacturing, but that's a broad statement that means nothing as well. There are less restrictions in laser sintering processes than there are in others. So you have to take it by technology and potentially application as well. In terms of the materials, there's a really interesting point that we're at now, in that the metals market, again, as I mentioned earlier, has seen machines that can produce components out of real-world known material alloy, metallurgical alloys, so 316 stainless, Ti64, blah, 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 Inconels, etc. That has seen the proliferation of use, because people understand that. Okay, there's differences in microstructure, there's differences in fatigue life, there's differences in all sorts of different things, but fundamentally it's still made out of a material I know and I've used before, so I can probably manipulate it into something that I want. In the polymer space, that's less true. So laser sintering machines, or laser powder bed fusion polymer machines. They have some real materials in there. So you've got polyamide, so nylons, nylon 11s, nylon 12s, and there are a few others. But the vast majority of use is for prototyping, and the vast majority of those parts that come off those machines are nylon 12. In the rest of the machinery, most of the materials that come off are a simulated something. So they are something like ABS. Actually, I'm just checking myself there. Extrusion, yes, it will be extrusion systems. Yes, it will be ABS. Yes, it will be polycarbonate. But then you have process limitations to actually get the material properties you want. In the jetting, in the vat polymerization systems, it's not what it's a simulated version of ABS. It's a simulated version of polycarbonate, polypropylene, blah blah blah, and that means that people are not comfortable with it, and it's holding back. So there is actually a real need for innovation in the machine and material side, specifically in the polymeric side, and also in the ceramic side. Ceramics we haven't talked about at all. There's a good reason for that. It's really hard.
Go on then.
and that is not a pun. It's really hard to do ceramics because there's almost always a secondary process that you need to go through. And so polymer, there needs to be innovation in the manufacturing process and material space to allow real polymers to be manufactured and give you some of the advantages that you see in the metal systems. In my view, ceramics are a whole different ballgame.
I'm very interested in the point you made about polymers, because I'm old enough to remember when there was a new engineering polymer being announced every week, and it seems strange to me that we've got these sort of new innovative processes, and yet the materials development doesn't quite seem to have kept up.
It hasn't. It's not kept up in the sense for manufacturing. It has for prototyping. So you want clear, you want something that's tougher, you want something. So it has for prototyping. But it comes back to what Simon and Alberto said. It's about the application. If nobody's asking for it, nobody will develop it. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg going on. If nobody's asking for a new polymer that has biocompatibility and biodegradability or super high elongation, blah blah blah, then I won't develop one then because you're happy and I'm getting revenue from the ones that I'm selling you. So there's a chicken and egg element to materials innovation, and in injection molding, the reason why there was a new one coming out every week is because people wanted to do more with injection molding. When people realise that they can do that with additive manufacturing, then that will come.
I think that's a very interesting point, and perhaps given time we'll explore that in a feature article together a bit later on, but I'm very interested in that area and why that's been that difference, and obviously you've explained it. It would be quite interesting to follow through. Alberto, your final comments, please.
On the what I would like to see in the future.
Right, yes.
So, first of all, I also want to mention that training is important for new generations from the university, from different type of organization, also to communicate the right the right things about this technology. Then I think that it will, in general, we are talking about a big family of technologies, not just one or two now. So they will keep on growing. They are different, having different level of TRL level now. It will be important, as I said, probably to even introduce, to develop process control, to develop, reduce the cost for process qualification and certification of the part, because it's another blocker. Developed additive metal, additive material that they have a better weldability, and that's I think that some of the key things, and develop in process control qualification and certification. So ideally, it will be great to have a camera. There are now devices where you remove the job and the build from the machine. You have a device that tells you if everything is fine, and you then have every time to go through scanning, CMM, cutting the parts, and these are huge costs.
Process automation, process control.
Something that tells you
Yeah.
Is it okay or not?
Yeah.
Right? Online.
Thank
So
you.
this
and
is, I think, really will be great. There are a lot of efforts on all these topics. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Simon, it is your opportunity to close us down.
Close us down. So I think for me, the thing that I'd like to see more in the future is this next generation of engineers coming through who will only ever see it as something that exists already. Yeah. It's being taught at universities. It's now part of the toolbox people come into engineering and into industry with. Therefore, suddenly it's not a massive change. It's just another thing that you can select, that you can use, and I think that will shift the focus from this is new, this is dangerous, this is risky, to we're optimistic, and this actually is just something that works in some places and doesn't work in other places, and you use it where it fits.
And that's a good optimistic point on which to finish. So I'd like to thank our three speakers for their insights. I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface, really. So there's a lot of areas we could proceed with, and maybe next time we will. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions, Simon, Alberto, and Chris. Thank you.